6 years. It has been 6 long, grueling years since the initial release of Overwatch. The wait for Overwatch 2 had started in 2019 after BlizzCon, leaving many players hopeful, only for 3 years to pass with nothing. No community updates, no release dates, and nothing to look forward to, with the COVID-19 pandemic as a cherry on top. It's been a rough time for Overwatch fans, but if you are watching this video, Overwatch 2, or at least the beta, is fast approaching. Whether you are new here, a returning fan, or a dedicated player, we've got some catching up to do. So let's get right into it, right from the beginning. May 24th, 2016, the day it all started. Overwatch releases after a successful beta with the new character, Ana, a much needed support for the game in the early stages, and arguably the least problematic of the new heroes implemented into the game. A game unlike any others prior floods the market, with big names joining the space to get their hands on it. I remember waking up on Saturday mornings as a kid incredibly excited to watch Tim the Tatman's old intro, followed by some laughs in Overwatch Apex, the main competitive esports tournament series for Overwatch run in South Korea, featuring teams from well-known franchises such as Envious and Cloud9 and other Overwatch legends like Runaway and Lunatic High. As time went on, Blizzard continued to implement new maps, balance changes, and characters in a 4-month cycle. Players used to be able to lock duplicate characters, creating crazy strategies like 6 Torbs on Dorado and 1 Lucio with 5 Tracers. But with Blizzard's change to this in Season 1 to its coin flip meta, it was clear that the Overwatch team had a clear grasp of their competitive vision for the game at the start of its life cycle, which began to change over time. The balance between the game's competitive nature and casual appeal became lopsided. This period can be viewed over the course of 2 years through their character releases. Sombra came first during Season 2 in November of 2016, allowing the player to hack other characters, disabling their abilities for a short duration of time. This may have been the team's attempt at pushing popular triple tank compositions out of the meta, but as the player base improved, more options had to be made in order to counteract a stale gameplay experience. Orisa made her debut shortly after during Season 4 in March of 2017, introducing a much-needed alternative option from Reinhardt. Doomfist arrived during Season 5 in July, answering the demands of fans that have been anticipating his reveal since the beginning of Overwatch. Then, Moira was released during Season 7 in November, which is when it was clear that problems arising from power creep within the game were returning. People began to realize that playing 2 tanks, 2 DPS, and 2 supports wasn't always the most optimal, even if it wasn't the way the game was necessarily meant to be played. And with the release of Moira, quadruple tank compositions were introduced to the competitive community. While these compositions were strong during their time, it wasn't like they were unkillable. At this stage in the game, every composition had an Achilles heel, and while it did take the player base a bit longer to figure it out than metas past, they eventually did, utilizing characters like Junkrat and Reaper to burst bulky characters down. Even though players began to figure this out, however, it was clear with a new character approaching that something big needed to come to bring Overwatch back on top. Fortnite went free to play in September of 2017 and started gaining traction shortly after when their second season released in December of 2017. Fortnite Season 3 was coming shortly after in February, so the Overwatch team needed to go big or go home with their next character. 2018 had to be a big year for Overwatch, or else it was all destined to fail. The Overwatch team had already announced the Overwatch League in 2016, with the inaugural season starting in 2018, which was their ace up their sleeve. The Overwatch League is a franchise league, much like the NFL, but for gaming with in-person events in California and other areas around the country of America for special occasions. The competitive theme that the game was founded upon seemed to be brought back into focus, as it seemed to be Blizzard's answer to the big powerhouse games threatening their share within the shooter game market. Fans received some much-needed optimism for the game, but it wasn't long until the nail in the coffin was bashed right back into place. In an incredibly overpowered state, Brigitte was implemented into the game on March 20th, 2018. When we look at Brigitte now, we look at her as a mistake with a fundamentally broken design, allowing the powerful composition of goats to reign the meta for years upon years. But it wasn't always like that. Brigitte was looked upon as the first anti-dive support initially, defending her backline from threats. Problem was that she did this a little bit too well, and arguably still does to this day. Her damage was insane, along with an incredibly steady health pool that was almost impossible to deplete, even as a DPS. It was at this point where multi-role characters became an issue, as they are fundamentally broken to the core. It is nearly impossible to have a character that fills 2 niches that is perfectly balanced. Usually, a character will be oppressive or simply underwhelming when introduced in this format, and Brigitte was far from underwhelming upon her release. With all of this in mind, it was only a matter of time before someone figured out a way to exploit this incredibly powerful character. That is when Goats GG, a team made up of some of the most incredibly skilled console players at the time, switched to PC, creating an infamous composition. Created by Gator and his younger brother Scotty, they brought together the likes of the top Xbox players at the time like Tensa and Kaluge and were prepared to make a powerhouse team, but no one in the PC race knew anything was coming. As an Xbox player at the time this was being created, however, it seemed so obvious, but it was only a matter of time. Utilizing Brigitte alongside the likes of Reinhardt, Diva, Zarya, Moira, Lucio, and Brigitte, the team swept through the Open Division tournament as well as the Contenders Trials tournament, letting them into the top of the competition. From small names to serious contenders, even signing the likes of XQC to substitute in when some of their players were banned from playing, as they couldn't suppress some of that classic Xbox game chat toxicity. Time passed as more and more teams adopted the composition, even within the Overwatch League, with the exception of Clockwork Vendetta, and a few other Joker teams here and there. After a year of a stale Goats meta, teams within the Overwatch League finally began to figure out that there were more options besides just Goats. Some teams, like the Chengdu Hunters, were just not up to pace with the brawly composition Goats was, which was the birth of triple DPS and quadruple DPS. These compositions created a much needed rock paper scissors matchup between the comps of DPS heavy comps, Goats, and Dive, which made the Overwatch League feel fresh to watch again alongside the game itself. But remember, this came out almost a year and a half later. With this much time passing, Blizzard decided after nerf and nerf to multiple characters within the Goats composition, as well as the additions of Ashe, Baptiste, and Sigma over the duration of its reign, a change needed to be made to the core gameplay of the game. In August of 2019, 222 Roll Lock was introduced and later released in the September that followed, which was a massive change compared to what the game had for years. While it was thought that this was a good change for the game, the metas that were to come were arguably much worse than that of Goats, especially when the Goats meta just started to get interesting. Sigma was introduced in the last few days of Goats, and now that 222 was right around the corner, new metas were right at the door. While Sigma was waiting for his official addition to the game on the public test server, Orisa Hog compositions tore through ladder, but once Sigma's day came, a new infamous composition would soon terrorize the ladder: Double Shield. The initial Double Shield wasn't your standard spam composition that you see today, however. It was much more like a brawl, utilizing Orisa's pull to set up Doom combos and abusing the overpowered state of Sigma to absolutely carry games. This only lasted for the duration of Season 18, but then Double Shield spam compositions became more popular once people realized the immense power of Baptiste, with the San Francisco Shock overtaking the Vancouver Titans with strong Bastion compositions. Time passed and Blizzard again realized that it was incredibly difficult to balance the game with fundamentally broken characters involved like Sigma and Brigitte. In March of 2020, the game and the climate of the entire world changed immensely. With the release of Overwatch's 21st season, hero pools were released as well as Echo a month later. Some players loved hero bans, while other players hated them due to their one-tricks being banned. But at the end of the day, many players saw them as Blizzard failing to balance their game. It was obvious that this wasn't Overwatch the way it was meant to be played. To have hero pools change in the middle of the Overwatch League season, alongside Open Division and Contenders, it didn't give enough time for the players to perfect the compositions they were playing, making the overall competition very lackluster. You may wonder why not just have the general player base play with hero bans and have the pros play without them, but that just isn't feasible, especially when players that one-tricked specific characters would simply not play the game when their character was banned. Many players get introduced to Overwatch through the Overwatch League as well, so having the disconnect would cause unnecessary confusion. With all of the negatives, Blizzard decided to remove the system in June of 2020, reverting back to the old way to play the game. But it just wasn't the same. As time passed, the game simply stopped receiving updates like it did in the past, and Echo was the last character to be released to the game, marking 2 years since the release of a new character in Overwatch. Interesting compositions like Double Bubble and Zen Brig came to fruition in this time, but it wasn't enough to keep the average player coming back for more. Surely there were tons of niche events in the competitive scene that happened here and there, including many of Chase OO's streamer tournaments, and most notably, the Overwatch Empowerment Cup, allowing for women and other marginalized groups of players to compete at a top level. These tournaments were incredibly competitive and a fantastic statement of inclusivity, but sadly enough, it wasn't enough to make it into the mainstream. Overwatch 2 was announced in 2019, and the game has been more than struggling to hold its identity in the ever-changing landscape of esports. But when was the real decline of Overwatch? Was it really just the release of Brigitte? Maybe it was the 222 roll lock system, or maybe it was BlizzCon 2019, when Overwatch 2 was initially announced and priorities changed from the game we have now to the game we will have in the future. Maybe it was sooner, maybe it was later, but with the promise of Overwatch 2 finally here, maybe Overwatch is back and ready to reclaim its throne in esports. It is an exciting time to be an Overwatch player, but understanding the history that makes us who we are is important moving forward into what's next. This community is by far some of the most passionate individuals in gaming, and even though the game hasn't always been perfect, I can't say I didn't enjoy the time I've spent here so far. Hopefully this sparked some much needed nostalgia for you all. Thank you all so much for watching, but until next time, I've got to peace out and Paz out. I'll see you in Overwatch 2.